We moved into the neighborhood in early spring, when the trees were just starting to bloom and the world felt like it might finally make sense again. The cul-de-sac was quiet, lined with tidy brick homes and manicured lawns, the kind of place where wind chimes tinkle gently in the breeze and porch swings don't creak too loud. It was the kind of calm I desperately needed. For me, and more importantly for my daughter. Emily had been through more than most adults survive. The accident that took her ability to walk happened a year before, a drunk driver on a rainy highway, who walked away with a scratch while my little girl nearly didn't make it. After months of hospitals, surgeries, and rehab, we were finally ready for a fresh start. That's what this move was supposed to be. A fresh start in a quiet neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened, where we could forget the sound of sirens and the smell of antiseptic, where Emily could feel safe again. I work remote IT support, long hours but flexible. I'm a single dad, and every ounce of my energy has gone into protecting Emily since the day she was born. Especially now. She's my world. She's sharp, funnier than me by a mile, and despite everything, she smiles more than she cries. She insists on wheeling herself everywhere, refusing help unless she absolutely needs it. Stubborn like her mother. Used to be. She's 13, but she's had to grow up fast. Too fast. The house we bought was modest but perfect. A small ramp led to the front door, and the backyard backed up to a little wooded area with birds and squirrels and the occasional curious raccoon. Emily called it our treehouse on the ground. The neighbors seemed polite, if a little distant. And the HOA? Well, we figured we'd deal with the rules. How bad could it be? For a few weeks, things were good. Peaceful. Emily started to sketch again. We even baked together, something we hadn't done since before the crash. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a coffee, watching her wheel around the driveway under the streetlights, laughing. And then she showed up. Karen. The first time I saw her, she was walking a tiny white dog that looked like it belonged on a designer purse rather than a leash. She wore an oversized sun hat, spotless yoga pants, and a matching pastel tracksuit that had never seen sweat. Her makeup was flawless, like TV anchor flawless, and her nails were those long acrylic ones, painted blood red. She walked like she owned the sidewalk, chin up, every step carefully placed like she was being watched, and maybe she was, by everyone. I was out front, adjusting the flowers by the ramp and fixing the solar lights along the driveway. Emily was a few feet away, working on chalk art, her wheels leaving streaks in the soft powder as she drew swirls and stars. It was a calm afternoon, until the voice broke it. "Oh, hi there," the woman called out, voice sugary sweet but laced with something sharper underneath. "You must be new." I stood up, brushing my hands on my jeans. "Yeah, just moved in. Last month, Before I could finish, she was already at the foot of our driveway, sunglasses pushed up on her head like a crown. Her eyes scanned me, then Emily, then back again. "I'm Karen," she said with a practiced smile. "I live 3 houses down. Welcome to the neighborhood. We're a very tight-knit, active community. People really take pride in how everything looks around here." There was an emphasis in her tone, pointed, deliberate. Her gaze flicked toward the ramp, the chalk, and finally to Emily in her wheelchair. Her smile didn't change, but her eyes did. Cold, calculating. I just love seeing kids outside, really. But I do wonder, have you had a chance to go over the HOA guidelines yet? We're pretty thorough about, appearances. It helps maintain property values. I blinked. We read through the handbook before we bought the place. I think we're good. She chuckled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, of course, it's just some folks miss the fine print. The board can be very particular, things like ramps, lawn decorations, even driveway chalk. They've all been flagged before." She tilted her head as if she were sympathizing with us, but every word was wrapped in condescension. I glanced at Emily. She was pretending not to listen, but I knew her ears were tuned in. I gave Karen a tight smile. "We'll keep that in mind. Thanks for stopping by." She smiled wider, but something in her jaw twitched. "You're not official members yet, right? I mean, the HOA meeting's next week. We'll see if you're a good fit. And with that, she turned and strolled off, that ridiculous little dog trotting behind her like a wind-up toy. I watched her go, pulse ticking in my neck. Emily looked up at me and asked, "What's her problem?" I didn't have a good answer, just a bad feeling. It started small, like most things do. A notice in the mailbox about the height of, well, the mailbox. Apparently it was 1.5 inches too low according to some obscure HOA guideline buried in a 30-page PDF. A week later, a warning. About the grass. Slightly over 3 inches in some areas, the letter said. I had mowed it 2 days earlier. Then came the comment about the ramp. Not to my face, of course. That would have been too direct for Karen. Instead, it was passed, through a neighbor who happened to hear, that some members of the HOA felt the wooden ramp disrupted the visual harmony of the community. I asked if visual harmony was a real term, or just HOA speak for discrimination. The neighbor gave me an awkward smile and mumbled something about checking with the board. Karen didn't stop there. She began patrolling the street like she'd been elected sheriff, phone in hand, snapping pictures from behind bushes and parked cars. I caught her doing it once, zooming in on the flower pots Emily had painted in bright, cheerful colors. She didn't even flinch when I called her out. Just smiled and said, "Just making sure we're all playing by the same rules." Soon I noticed the neighbors pulling back. The friendly waves turned into tight-lipped nods. Conversation stopped when I approached. Emily used to get invited to sit on porches and color with the neighbors' kids. Now those doors stayed closed. The whispers started, and so did the posts. Karen's social media was public, of course. She wanted an audience. Her posts were always vague enough to protect her legally, but not so subtle that you couldn't figure out who she meant. Some people think sympathy entitles them to exceptions. Rules are rules. Don't like them? Don't move here. Community standards, Mount Protector neighborhood. Or, when a single parent moves in and brings chaos with them, it affects all of us. Just saying. I didn't want to react. I tried not to let it get to me. But Emily wasn't built for this, not yet. She'd been through so much already, and this kind of isolation cut deep. She stopped drawing outside. The chalk stayed in the garage. When I asked her why, she shrugged and said, "What's the point? It just makes people mad." It all came to a head at a community meeting we reluctantly attended. Karen stood in front of the room like she was addressing the Senate. There were papers in her hand. Printouts of bylaws, I assumed, but she waved them like evidence. "We all care about maintaining a peaceful, orderly environment here," she said. "And while we're compassionate about certain circumstances, there's a level of disruption that affects us all." Her eyes didn't leave mine. I clenched my fists under the table. We've received multiple concerns about noise, clutter, and the general disruption caused by one of our newer residents. This isn't about targeting anyone. It's about standards. Emily leaned into me and whispered, "Is she talking about me?" Her voice was small, unsure. "She's full of crap," I whispered back, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Emily didn't speak the rest of the night. She didn't want to go back to the park after that. She barely left her room. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to stop. Not on its own. So I started documenting. Every letter, every photo I caught her taking, screenshots of her posts, dates, times, details. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind that feels too quiet to be dangerous. The sun was out, kids were on bikes, someone down the street was grilling. Just the normal sounds of suburban calm. Emily had been feeling a little better lately, sketching again and even asking to go to the park by herself. It was just down the block within sight of our front porch, and she wanted the independence. I hesitated like always, but I let her go. "Just be back before dinner," I said. She smiled and rolled down the driveway, humming to herself, long hair catching the sun. I watched her until she turned the corner, then went inside to start the oven. I wasn't even 10 minutes in when the first scream reached me. A shrill, cracking sound, followed by something much worse, a kind of chaos that only comes when something terrible has just happened. I ran. By the time I got to the small neighborhood park, there were people gathered, frozen in place. At the center of it all was Emily. On the ground, not in her chair, blood spreading fast across her shoulder, soaking through her favorite lavender hoodie. Her wheelchair was tipped over beside her like it had been shoved. She wasn't crying. She was gasping, like she couldn't get air. Her hands clawed weakly at the grass. Karen stood a few feet away, holding a compact pistol in both hands like she was posing for a cop drama. Her dog yapped frantically on its leash, tangling around her ankles. Karen's face was pale, lips trembling, but her voice was steady. "She came at me," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I was scared. She threatened me." I dropped to my knees beside Emily. "Baby, stay with me," I said, pressing my hands against her shoulder, feeling the warm, slick mess of it. Blood. So much blood. Her eyes fluttered, then locked onto mine. "She said I don't belong here," she whispered, barely audible. I couldn't breathe. Someone called 911. The ambulance arrived faster than I thought possible. Sirens, tearing through the still afternoon. Paramedics lifted Emily carefully onto a stretcher while I tried to stay calm, tried to answer their questions, tried not to look at the red pooling on their gloves. Karen stood nearby, already giving a statement to the police. She was aggressive. I didn't know what she was going to do. She rolled up fast and started yelling. I feared for my life. I wanted to lunge at her. I wanted to scream that she was lying, that she was a monster. But I couldn't leave Emily. I stayed with her. As they loaded her into the ambulance, holding her cold hand, brushing hair from her face. She was still conscious, but barely. At the hospital, everything blurred. Bright lights, forms, tubes, surgeons with clipped voices and tired eyes. They told me the bullet had torn through her shoulder but missed vital organs. "She's lucky," one of them said. I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken, violated, helpless. I sat by her bed for hours, watching machines blink and hum, listening to her shallow breathing. Her face was pale, eyes closed, arm bandaged and immobilized. She looked so small in that bed. They wouldn't let me see Karen, wouldn't let me confront her. She had already told her story, claimed self-defense, said Emily's wheelchair made sudden erratic movements, said she was frightened, said she acted to protect herself. The worst part? Some people believed her. "She has a concealed carry permit," one officer told me, almost like that made it okay. If she felt threatened, I couldn't hear the rest. I went home that night alone, sat in the kitchen with the lights off, hands still stained with my daughter's blood. Every second played in my head like a film I couldn't shut off. The way Emily looked up at me. The sound she made when she hit the ground. I had tried to stay quiet, tried to avoid drama, tried to follow the rules. Karen shot my daughter and said she didn't belong. And now I wasn't just angry. I was something colder, something sharper. She wanted war. She didn't know who she was dealing with. The trial started 6 weeks after the shooting. Emily was still recovering. Physically, she was healing well, but the trauma had settled deep into her bones. She flinched at sudden noises, refused to leave the house without me, and barely spoke above a whisper when strangers were around. At night, she'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, begging me not to let that lady hurt her again. But Karen showed up to court in pearls and pastels, her face carefully composed like this was just another HOA meeting. She cried when she took the stand, of course she did, but not for Emily, for herself, for the trauma she claimed she suffered after having to defend herself. She played the part perfectly. She said all the right things, claimed she had no choice, said she felt threatened by Emily's sudden approach and aggressive tone. She painted my daughter, a 13-year-old in a wheelchair with a sketchbook in her lap, as a danger. She said Emily rolled up on her fast and reached for something. That, in the moment, she feared it was a weapon. It was a pencil. Karen's lawyer leaned hard into stand-your-ground laws. He talked about reasonable fear and split-second decisions. He pulled out grainy stills from someone's Ring camera that showed Emily approaching Karen, no sound, no context, and framed them as evidence of intent. And then the HOA showed up. They called her a pillar of the community, praised her commitment to neighborhood standards, her volunteer work, her civic responsibility. One board member even said, She only ever wanted what's best for our neighborhood. She's always been protective, and maybe in this case it was just a tragic misunderstanding. Protective. That word made me want to flip the table. What they really meant was that she protected their image, their neat lawns and quiet sidewalks. And Emily didn't fit that image. A kid in a wheelchair was too loud, too messy, too visible. She made people uncomfortable. They even used her disability against her. The defense brought in a behavioral specialist who claimed children with trauma can exhibit unexpected behaviors that confuse or alarm the average bystander. They implied that Emily was mentally unstable, that Karen had no way of knowing what she might do. My daughter had a coloring book in her lap. After 2 days of testimony, the verdict came down. Not guilty. Self-defense. Karen walked out of that courtroom like she'd just won a tennis match. She didn't look back at us, didn't offer an apology. Just smiled for the cameras and let her lawyer do the talking. The HOA released a statement later that week, calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding between residents. They urged everyone to move forward and focus on healing as a community. Healing? My daughter wouldn't go near a window, let alone the park. She jumped at shadows, flinched when the doorbell rang. She'd wake up in tears asking me if we were safe. She didn't believe me when I said yes, because we weren't. The system failed us, it failed her. Karen shot a child and got away with it because she smiled in the right places and cried on cue. Because she was rich, white, and knew how to game the rules. Because the people who made the rules lived in houses just like hers. I sat at the edge of Emily's bed that night, watching her sleep. Her bandaged arm twitched in a nightmare. She mumbled Karen's name. That's when I knew. If the system wasn't going to bring justice, I would. I couldn't sleep after the trial. Not properly. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, listening for sounds that weren't there, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused, sharpened. Every minute I wasn't taking care of Emily, I was thinking about Karen. Her face haunted me, not just because of what she did, but because of what she got away with. I had trusted the system. I would never make that mistake again. So I started digging. It began harmlessly enough, Googling her name, scrolling through property records, scanning old HOA newsletters. Then it grew into something more. I became obsessed. I dug up her LinkedIn, her Facebook, her Instagram. I looked at every tagged photo, every comment, every little trace she left behind. She had a carefully manicured image online, just like she did in real life. But the cracks were there if you knew where to look. It turns out Karen had a past. Not criminal, at least not on paper, but shady. Financial inconsistencies, businesses that popped up and vanished in a year, tax liens in another county under her maiden name. A supposedly volunteer position on the HOA board that came with an unlisted monthly stipend, paid under the table by the HOA president, who, according to a very angry ex-wife I managed to track down, was also having an affair with her. Classy. Then there was the credential issue. Karen always bragged about having a legal background, just enough to keep things in order, she'd say at meetings. But she had no law degree, no certifications, nothing but a few online courses in real estate management and a fake LinkedIn. Endorsement from someone who didn't exist. I traced that account, it was a shell. Created 2 weeks before her first HOA election. I started building a timeline. Dates, receipts, meetings, tax records, social media posts. I had a spreadsheet that would make a detective jealous. I cross-referenced her online claims with public records. I combed through HOA financial statements that should have been transparent, but were buried behind login portals nobody else had access to, until a former board member gave me his old credentials. Apparently, Karen had burned more bridges than she realized. A lot of people didn't like her, but they were scared of her. Now, though, I gave them a place to talk. I met quietly with neighbors she'd fined into silence, with people whose complaints were mysteriously lost. One woman said Karen had cited her for unauthorized patio furniture 3 times in a week, while Karen had the exact same set in her own backyard. Another man told me Karen showed up at his house late at night to warn him about how we handle troublemakers. They were scared, but not anymore, because I had proof, I had voices. I started recording everything. Karen's snide comments at meetings. Her passive-aggressive threats when she thought no one was listening. Her conversations with the HOA president behind the rec center after hours. I bought a dash cam, a body cam, a cloud storage plan. Everything went into a secure drive, labeled, time-stamped, duplicated. Then I started tipping anonymous emails, calls from burner numbers, screenshots sent to local news reporters, to housing authorities, to IRS tip lines. I even got in touch with a state official running for office, a progressive type looking to clean up community corruption. Karen's name landed on her desk with a bow on top. It took time, but the cracks widened. Whispers started. Anonymous. Posts appeared online. Reporters started poking around. People asked questions at HOA meetings that Karen couldn't answer. Something was shifting. Her smile got tighter. Her eyes darted more. She didn't know where it was coming from. But her little empire, it was starting to collapse. And I hadn't even started the real damage yet. It started with a simple email, one that didn't have my name on it, just a burner account and a subject line that read, Urgent, Internal HOA Corruption, Financial Crimes Attached. Inside were screenshots of doctored but very believable financial statements showing irregular payments, money quietly funneled from the HOA's Community Improvement Fund into a shell account. The account was under the name of a now-defunct landscaping company that Karen used to hire 3 years ago. That company, according to business records, never did a single job. But it had one employee listed on the payroll, Karen. The numbers were fake, but the shell company was real. And so was the signature authorizing the payments, lifted from a genuine HOA document I'd scanned at a meeting and digitally replicated. All of it enough to raise questions. All of it just believable enough to spark suspicion in the right hands. The email was sent to every member of the HOA board, each one anonymously addressed with the subject line, You didn't hear this from me. Paranoia did the rest. Within 48 hours, 2 board members had called an emergency session. I knew because one of them, a nervous retiree named Tom who'd once received a bogus fine for painting his door beige, tipped me off. Something's going down, he muttered. She's in deep. While that was simmering, I moved to phase 2. I created another anonymous leak. This time it was an accidental forward from Karen's personal email address, crafted with just enough juicy gossip and coded language to raise eyebrows. Make sure we scrub the inspection reports before the next review, it read. We can't afford another complaint about special needs exceptions. It sets a bad precedent. It landed in the inbox of a local mom who ran the neighborhood Facebook page. She posted a screenshot with the caption, Can someone explain this? And it took off like wildfire. Within hours, everyone was speculating. Was Karen targeting disabled residents? Was she manipulating reports? I watched the comments roll in. Some defended her at first, but not for long. The real blow came when I mailed a thick, unmarked envelope to a local investigative journalist. Inside were tax documents, excerpts from HOA emails, minutes from board meetings, and a short note. There's more if you're interested. Start with the fake landscaping contract. I didn't expect a response, but a week later, I saw her. Channel 9's Marissa Delgado, standing at Karen's front door, microphone in hand, camera crew behind her. Karen opened the door, saw the cameras, and did what she always did, smiled wide. Then Marissa asked, Can you comment on the recent allegations of HOA fund misappropriation, forged documents, and targeted harassment of disabled residents? Then Hannah's smile cracked, just a little. No comment, Karen said, her voice tight. But the story aired that night, and the night after, and the next week too. News vans circled our sleepy little street like vultures. Neighbors gawked behind curtains. People started talking again, really talking, and not just about the shooting, about everything. The fines, the favoritism, the backdoor deals, The fake meetings, the missing receipts. Suddenly everyone remembered the little things they'd let slide. Now they saw the pattern. HOA board members resigned. One even publicly apologized, saying he'd been pressured and misled. A special audit was called. The state's housing authority announced a formal investigation. Karen's pillar of the community mask shattered like glass. Her allies turned on her fast. Even the HOA president, the one she was rumored to be involved with, went silent. When he was asked to comment, he said, "I was misinformed and manipulated." A classic political dodge, but it told me everything I needed to know. I watched it all unfold from a distance. Never said a word. I kept my head down, played dumb. Just a grieving parent trying to move on. That's what they saw. But inside, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Control. Karen withdrew from the HOA. Her house went up for sale weeks later. Rumor had it she was being sued, maybe even investigated by the IRS. I didn't care if she was charged or not. I didn't need a court verdict this time. I just needed her gone. That evening, Emily sat next to me on the porch, sketchbook on her lap, sunlight on her face. For the first time in months, she looked peaceful. She turned to me and smiled. Not a forced one, not a sad one, a real one. "You okay, baby?" I asked. She nodded. "It's quieter now." And it was. The clubhouse was packed that night. More bodies than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. Neighbors who never came to anything were shoulder to shoulder in folding chairs, standing along the walls, some peeking through the back windows. Word had spread fast. Karen had called the meeting herself in some last-ditch effort to clarify misunderstandings and restore order. She came dressed like she was running for mayor. Cream blazer, pearls, makeup layered thick enough to stop a bullet. She smiled, held her head high, walked to the front like she still had control of the room. But she didn't. Not anymore. What she didn't expect was who else was in the room. Marissa Delgado sat in the back row, camera crew with her, mic resting across her lap. A few HOA board members shifted uncomfortably when they saw her. Others looked relieved. Then came the real twist. Paul, the former HOA treasurer, stood up before Karen could even start her speech. He walked to the podium, pulled a folder from his coat and said loud and clear, "I'd like to enter some evidence into tonight's discussion." Karen froze. That perfect smile didn't even twitch, but her hands tightened around the sides of the podium. Paul opened the folder. Public records search turned up multiple charges under a previous name, identity theft, check fraud, even a restraining order from a former employer. Nothing stuck legally, but the paper trail's long. Gasps, whispering. A few phones were already out, recording. Karen stammered, "Those are sealed documents. Irrelevant. Fabricated. This is character assassination." Then the screen turned on. A neighbor who worked in AV had brought the projector, and suddenly footage played, grainy but clear enough. Karen in her backyard forging a signature on an HOA form. Another clip, audio only, caught her voice threatening. A neighbor behind the rec center. "Drop the complaint or I'll fine you into foreclosure." More gasps. The room was buzzing now, turning, shifting like a tide. Karen snapped. "You people are sheep," she screamed, slamming her hands on the podium. "This is all lies. I built this community. I protected you." "No, someone," shouted from the back. "You controlled us." Another. "You shot a child." Karen looked around like a cornered animal. Her hands trembled. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then the police entered the room, 2 officers in uniform. Quiet but unmistakable. "Karen Bishop," one of them said. She backed away, stumbling. "You can't arrest me. This is a smear campaign. I didn't do anything wrong." "You're not under arrest," the officer said. "You're being escorted for questioning related to an active IRS and fraud investigation. Please come with us." She shrieked something incoherent as they led her out. Cameras followed. Neighbors stared. Some whispered. Some cheered. A few clapped. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I stood, nodded politely to Marissa as I passed, and walked out the front doors into the cool night air. Justice hadn't come from the court. It had come from the truth. Karen's house sat empty for a while. The for sale sign stayed up for months before it quietly switched to foreclosed. No one missed her. The yard grew wild, the roses died, and someone eventually came by to gut the place. Rumor was the IRS froze her assets, and her fancy car got repossessed. The HOA wiped her name from their records like she'd never been there, but people remembered. Oh, they remembered. The HOA held new elections. This time, no secret deals, no hidden votes. The new president was a retired teacher who actually listened to residents. First order of business? Removing half the petty rules Karen had weaponized. Second, a formal apology to Emily and me, delivered at the same community center where Karen once strutted like she owned the place. Emily took it all in with quiet eyes. She didn't say much during the meeting, just held my hand and nodded when they apologized. But I could see it. Something inside her was softening, healing. We started going back to the park again. Slowly at first. She took a few cautious rolls around the path, then stayed longer each time. She started therapy with someone who specialized in trauma, and one morning, I walked past her room and saw her sitting at the window, brush in hand, painting a sunrise. The wheelchair didn't define her. What happened didn't define her. We weren't victims anymore. I stood in the doorway watching her, and I thought about everything we'd been through. All the nights I wanted to scream, to break, to give up. But we didn't. We held on. We fought back. Karen once said we weren't HOA material. Damn right, we're better.